problems with your brood, under the cappings, before the cap. And then third part, we dealt with mites and virus issues. Now, today, we're going to be a little more on the lighter side. The first three were probably the most problems arise in a beehive in those first three segments: queens, brood issues, or the virus mite issues. And that takes down the majority of a hive and why a hive doesn't progress. Today, we're going to start off with nuisance issues. And I'm going to go through a series of issues that you could confront that could take down your hive in a big way. And you want to pay attention and what to do with each of these issues as well, so that you don't get caught by surprise, as you're going to see in the first few slides. Okay, go ahead, Aaron. So you can see here the part two. See, it's we change the order a little. We're going to do nuisance issues: small hive beetle, wax moth, ants, mice, skunks, bears, yellow jackets, robbing. And then we'll go to the seasonal issues, temperature issues, dearths, honey pollen bound, starvation, signs of nutritional deficiency, chilled brood, ventilation, and moisture in the hive. And finally, we'll end up with other hive issues: hive placement, neighbor issues, pesticide issues, and identification of pesticide kills, areas of oversaturation and what signs to watch for, and food sources, whether you have enough food sources for the bees in your area, and finally expanding your apiary. So let's go ahead with the first slide. And here you can see, I always loved rainbows. You know, used to sing when I first met my wife, sing a song, I'll build you a rainbow. And maybe at some point I can sing that for you. But these hives I came to, you can see the bees all flying in. It was toward the end of the day, a long day, about 7 o'clock at midsummer. And here I am finishing up in these rainbow hives. I just admired the brilliance of colors, and it reminded me of a beautiful rainbow. Okay, go ahead. And another piece of real estate, I showed you in the first part one, a segment of the highest real estate you can get in beekeeping hives. This is right up there. And as you can see, it's a nice home that you're providing for your bees, and they'll be proud of their home. So, you know, hives can be beautiful, and the real estate can be more expensive, less expensive. And you see here the things you can do, your children can do, you can do, neighbor can do, or hire an artist to do. Okay, go ahead, Ann. And of course, these are some of my favorites. This young lady loves authors. She loves reading poetry, literature, and she had her hives all in the same design with the author's name from her favorite of the top 5. And at the end, I think somewhere you're going to see her top 5 authors. But here you can see Emily Dickinson was her favorite author. So she put this as the first hive in a row of hives. So it really decorates the house. And there you can see that rainbow of colors, and even more than that she's had. So you just get an idea. Now, placement of hives facing the sun, south or east, south preferably, with something as a barrier, a wind barrier in the back of them that breaks any wind coming in. Go ahead. And now we're talking about nuisance issues. Here's a bear that came into one gentleman's hive. You can see a pretty big male bear, and he had some bacon hanging on the wires. This bear once tried it, shook its head, backed off, came back for a second attempt, and once he got zapped in the mouth with that 5,000 volts, he decided to leave it at bay. So this bear didn't do any damage. Go ahead. Here's 3 bears, all at the same location. 3 bears, all at the same location, and made a massacre of the hives here. This is a night from the camera at night. They came after. That's the only time anybody has caught the video with 3 different bears at one location: mama bear, papa bear, and baby bear. Okay, go ahead. And here you can see what happens when bears come to your apiary. total destruction. And how they choose the hives and why they leave one, who knows? But they just totally destroy, gnaw away, and here's the after effects. So talking about affecting your hives in a big way, if you're in northern Worcester County, western Worcester County, even down in Worcester, we had two beekeepers have their hives last year, one on Westport Street, and I forget the other street, damaged by bears in Worcester. So you're not exempt. And even now out toward Concord, Lexington, and the eastern part of the county for sure. So they're all over. They're less likely to attack your hives or get to your hives in eastern part of the county or the southern part of the county. But I've had two locations in Sutton destroyed by bears. So it's there, and you have to consider electric fence. And just recently at two of my locations, I got the styrofoam replicas of famous movie actors at life size, and I put them behind the hives. At one location I had in Douglas, and the bear took down a hive. I put one of the J.I. Ewing up behind the hives. The bears approached twice now, stood up on 2 feet, looked, and then ran back into the woods. So maybe I'm thinking about making some styrofoam replicas of myself and sell them instead of electric fences. And you'll be able to see my face every day you go out to the hives. Okay, go ahead. And sometime a moose comes by. And no damage to the bees, but we did have one case 3 or 4 years ago, a moose, again, a night scene, a moose actually with his nose pushed the whole hive over. So rare. The moose did run away. The camera showed it, moose running away when the bees started coming out and stinging. So the moose, for the most part, leave them alone. Go ahead. Obviously, skunks. These two skunks were in a hive in back of the hive in a big log, and all of a sudden the hive started getting aggressive. And I said to the folks, I said, it's probably a skunk. And they'll come to the front of the hive, scratch on the front entrance or tap on the front entrance. And as the bees come into the entrance, they tap them and crush them and then eat them. And a skunk that does this night after night, they always go to the same hive, by the way. They go to the same hive night after night once they've chosen the hive, and they'll eat a lot of bees. The bees become very defensive. And you can see they're nice, pretty looking animals, but they are damaging and cause aggressive hives. And 70% of the time, the aggressive hive is because of skunks. So if you've got a hive that was kind of not mean, not aggressive, and all of a sudden they started getting more and more aggressive, more than likely it's skunks. Now, what do? You put chicken wire all crinkled up around the hives, and in all the cases where I've suggested it, the hives, they've calmed down, and the hive became very calm after that, because you don't want an aggressive hive. Next slide. Where it looks this like you say, thousands of bees attacking you. You can see here, just totally covered with bees, an aggressive hive. After they skunked the chicken wire, about 2 weeks, the hive was calm as can be. So go ahead. Mice are an issue more in the winter time. This is a seasonal thing. The mice won't go in during the spring. Some of the bees are active, but as soon as it gets to the end of October, what happens is mice are looking for a home to stay warm, where they've got pollen for protein, and they'll gnaw away and destroy. And you can see here, this mouse happened to get stung up by the bees and died right there. And however, in most cases, they sit very quietly in the bottom super as the bees up in the upper move to the upper super, and they gently stay there quietly. All they've got pollen, which they eat. And go ahead, next. And here you can see the damage. On the left side, they chewed out the whole center and the pollen around the nest. In this case, there were 3 young ones. I caught this here this spring. 3 young ones nursing onto the female mouse. They fell to the bottom of the hive. And here you can see all chewed up. The next frame over, right here on the right, all chewed the pollen right out of the whole frame, destroyed the whole frame. In some cases, they'll go 3, 4, 5 frames wide and destroys all the beautiful frames with the pollen and the honey. So mice, what do? Go ahead. You want to put a mouse guard on. Now I'm gonna give you some hints. The end of October, you want to leave it open pretty much till the end of October, so the bees on those warm days can fly in and out easily, bringing in pollen, cleaning out dead bees. With this, that's tough for the bees to do. However, by the end of October, the bees in some winters are starting already cluster in the hive, and that's when the mice will come in. And if they don't start nesting, then they will start gnawing away at the pollen at the very lower levels of the hive. So I suggest October, 25th and on, you put the mouse guard on. But a warning here, I've seen this year, which is the worst of years we've had for winter. No, do not put in an entrance reducer and the mouse guard. Don't put in both. Choose one or the other, because you want enough ventilation coming in, and you want the air coming up through the hive, taking the moisture out and venting from the top hive. We'll talk more about ventilation, but mice are a pest and they can do a lot of damage. They won't kill your bees, but they will rile them up. In the winter, it's not a good thing. If they move around too much, the bees will come out of cluster and start to erupt, and then it can't get back into cluster. And sometimes I've seen where at cold weather, it's caused a small little cluster to move away and then die. So, okay, go ahead. The small hive beetle. This is coming up with the packages. I'll tell you right now, everybody here is going to have some hive beetles. Now it's a tiny, this is magnified. It's only about a quarter of an inch. It looks just like this with the points on the abdomen, the thorax. You can see the little points. It's called a small hive beetle, and it will get in your hive with the package, and they can breed. Where usually we don't have sandy soil. So in Central Mass, we don't have much of a problem with this. But down on the Cape where it's sandy, this is a major problem. Now, what's your best bet up here, just in case? A hive beetle trap. It's a small little black trap. If you look in the catalogs, you'll find them. Plastic, cheap, 99 cents. And you put vegetable oil in. And that does a pretty good job. They go in and they can't get out, and it keeps the control. There's only one person this past year. Hold on just 1 minute, Ann. Just go back. There's only one person that I've seen that had hive beetle problems, all little yellowish larvae. If you start seeing these little cream-colored worms coming out of your cells, that's the hive beetle larva. And that means your hive is probably weak, because if the hive is strong enough, the hive beetle will not multiply in the hive. And therefore, you don't have to worry about those little worms going into the soil, pupating, and then coming up as hive beetles, adult hive beetles, and getting into your hive, because then it can become a problem. So keep an eye. You should see 6, 8 to begin with. Sometimes they might multiply a little, but you should never see all these cream-colored worms coming out. If you're seeing that, and it smells putrid, because they drill through the pollen, through the honey, and they defecate right in the honey and pollen. It smells putrid. So not a major pest for us here in Central Mass, but down on the Cape and sandy areas, they go into the soil, pupate, and emerge, and you start getting a multiplication, and then you could be in trouble if the hive is weak in particular. Go ahead. Now, ants aren't usually a major problem inside the hive. The carpenter ants will find a location. They'll go under your inner cover, and that quarter-inch space on your inner cover, they'll go up there, and I've seen maybe 2,000 eggs from the carpenter, the white eggs. And I just, before they get to spread and take off, I take my hand, crush them. That smells like formic acid. But sometimes the hives of a weaker hive, the ants will come down into the frames and infest the frames, eating the honey and taking the honey away. So what do we do for ants? Your best bet is you either take motor grease and put it around the legs of your stand, or cans of oil and set your hive stand into the cans of oil. Just make sure you don't have grass growing up above that, because the ants are pretty clever. They'll climb up the blades of grass and right into the hive. Make sure everything's clear, and with the motor oil or the motor grease, shouldn't have a problem with that. Go ahead. Again, swallows, barn swallows, you wouldn't think, but when you've probably seen the wires, electrical wires along electrical lines, sometimes 30, 40 barn swallows all lined up. And I had a location, I had to move them. Down in South Uxbridge on Elmwood Street, I had years ago, and every year, so after 2-3 years, I moved them out. You'd see them, they just dive at the honeybees, and they can eat a lot of honeybees. So, not a major, you don't see them, a large percent, but if you see them lining up on electrical wires and your hives are right there, they're after your honeybees. So that's an issue in that case. Go ahead. And then occasionally not, but the praying mantis. I caught this slide last year on my hives. This praying mantis was grabbing the honeybees as they came into the hive, and Dr. Callahan, Dave Lucon, we watched them eating the honeybee. They don't eat many, the 5, 6, and then they'll go and they'll be back. But again, not a major predator, but be aware. I usually don't kill them, or I just take and throw them somewhere away from the hives, and that usually does the trick. Go ahead. And of course, this is the one I hate. Anytime a hive gets weak and there's a dirt, there's no nectar out there, no pollen, these yellow jackets in the fall, they're vicious. They'll attack honeybee hives. A whole nest of yellow jackets will come at your bees. They're carnivorous, so they'll eat the larva. They'll wipe out a hive. A weaker hive, they will wipe out. Strong hives manage, but if you got a hive that's not particularly strong, the yellow jackets will come in, and you can see here, they go right after the honeybee, chew into the honeybee, kill the honeybee, and then they devour or bring it back to the nest. Larva, they'll eat the larva, the white larva, and of course the honey. Once the hive is dead, they just go in after a week. They'll remove all the honey in your hive, and all the honey is gone after the hive is dead. So we've seen a lot after and you can see here the honeybees coming in, but the yellow jackets do a lot of damage, and especially if you got nests nearby near to the hives, they'll come in. They'll test the hive and see if it's strong enough to defend itself. If not, they will just go right after it. Go ahead. And of course, just a great picture here of the honeybees coming in here with the pollen, the spring, the pussy willow pollen. You can see them here coming in. That was on one of the warmer days. Go ahead. And of course, what do you do for yellow jackets? Get yourself, the front end screen where the openings you can see at the top are only small openings with the honeybees can come in, and it's not open to the massive robbing by thousands of yellow jackets. So these screens, protect your hive against yellow jackets, and sometimes even not. They'll find those openings, and they'll still, one by one, you'll see them going in. In that kind of case, all you can do is move your hive to a new location, a mile away, a couple of miles away, because you can't move hives just a mile away. They'll come back to the original location. So 2 miles or more, and give them a new start somewhere else, because otherwise the yellow jackets just will keep going after them. Go ahead. And of course, we come to wax moth. Wax moth is not so much a problem with the beehive going, but once a beehive is very weak, again, notice I mentioned weak hives. Keep strong hives is the key to keeping your hives from any of these predators, except for the bears. But here you can see wax moth, female wax moth will lay her eggs, and then these hatch into larvae. These larvae, they just go right through the pollen, right through the honey. They make this nest, the fibers, and they can keep it warm in there, right in those fibers. It's amazing. You can feel the heat coming out, and you can see they'll just destroy all your frames, all your pollen. So the best bet here, if you got a hive that died out and it's still warm weather, I'm talking from August even into September, till the end of September, you want to take that hive in, put the frames into a freezer, and then into a bin, freezer for 0 degrees for 72 hours. That will kill the wax moth larva. Because you have to understand, they lay their eggs in there, the larva hatch, and then they start weaving all this, and they drill right through the pollen, and again, it makes a real mess. So freeze your frames 3 days, 0 degrees, put them into plastic heavy duty garbage bag or into bins where the wax moth can't lay eggs, the female wax moth, and they won't chew through the heavy duty wax plastic bags, but the lightweight ones, the female wax moth chew right through and go in. Go ahead. And of course, one last thing on nuisance problems, nuisance issues. It looks like bear damage, right? This is only the 4th or 5th time in my 45 years where I got called out. Lightning struck the hive, blew it apart. And occasionally, I don't know if it's the steel stand that it was on, but I've only come across 5 of them in 45 years, but I thought I'd throw this in. It just blew the total, this one was this past year, and I went out to see and I grabbed the picture here, but lightning can occasionally, they say to keep it away from trees. Talking to a individual electrician who I know, I said, why would that have happened from lightning? And he said right away, his comment was right next to a tree, came off the tree. And so anyway, I wouldn't worry about that one. I just thought you'd like to see what happens when lightning strikes a hive. And obviously the bees were all over in a cluster. He had to we took the cluster and we put it into a nuke box. And I haven't been back to find out if the hive made it through or what happened. So those are some of the nuisance issues that you have to deal with. And you can see what happens. Some of them you have no control over. The lightning, the others you have control over. Skunks, the bears, mice. You know, it's a matter of management and making sure these nuisance issues don't take your hive down. Okay, go ahead. And there's a picture of some of the other authors there, and you can't read them there, but that's one young lady that is a literary person, and all 5 hives have a different author. The top 5 authors. Okay, go ahead. Now we're moving in we're talking about seasonal and temperature issues. Now we're going to be moving in from winter into spring. So I related it to right now. This is the time at which we move from from winter into spring. We've been feeding sugar patties, but this is one of my hives. I took the picture the other day and I'm transferring over to sugar water, 2 to 1. And that's more to stimulate the queen so she's laying. When there's nectar coming in, it gives them a sense that there's a food source coming in, and the queens will tend to pick up more than if there's nothing coming in because of cold weather. Obviously, there's some maples, the maple pollen's coming in, but I haven't seen any nectar. On the warm days, I was looking for nectar from the maples. It hasn't been there yet. So there's nothing else that you'd be getting nectar and major floral right now. So right now you got to feed them the sugar syrup if you want stimulate the brood rearing. Go ahead. Okay, and one of the things that you're going to probably find is right now you still got some people have got a lot of honey. And what I'm going to say about feeding here, right now as you start feeding, keep in mind there's a balance between how much you feed being too much or not enough or just right. Keep in mind that you need to have at least 8 frames of brood, 2/3 or more open for brood rearing. And you got to be careful about closing it down less than that. And with sugar syrup, they will quickly close down your brood, because right now you just got your 2 brood chambers on, it doesn't take long, 2 gallons, 3 gallons, and they start putting that in into all the open space. Now you've cut the queen's ability to lay. You want food there and you want some stimulation with sugar syrup, but once you see them closing in all your frames and they're filling up, you stop. What you don't want is honey bound. 8 frames, keep that in mind. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So go ahead. This is what a frame, I'm talking about 8 frames, both sides looking like that. You notice a little bit of honey, pollen. You can see the pollen up in the middle part of the top of the frame. You see the honey on the both corners. Yeah, there you go. There's the honey. And 2/3 filled with brood. That way, the nurse bees have the honey right there, the pollen, and they can easily convert. They chew up the pollen and the nectar, and they add enzymes from their hypopharyngeal glands, and they feed the larva that's in here. So right now, it's crucial. The bees are building. In some cases, I've seen during the warm days, my hives, I've seen hives with 7 frames of brood already, down to 1.5 frames of brood. The hives that made it through the winter, running from 7.5 down to 1.5. So it's a wide range. You know, today, some of the couple of live hives I looked at, 2.5 frames of brood. One was just 1 frame of brood. And so it ranges, but don't close down, because as it get warmer, they can only right now she can only lay as many eggs as there are bees to keep it warm. And I can tell you right now, in a couple of my hives that have 7.5 frames, I can see where we had the cold nights, the last 2, they chilled brood. Then what will happen is the cluster, if it's warm, they expand the brood. You get 3-4 days, she expands the brood pretty quick. And then all of a sudden you get a cold spell of 2-3 days. They have to constrict the cluster to keep the brood warm. The outside perimeter will chill, and you'll see an uncapping. You'll see it uncapping, puncturing it, uncapping it, removing the chilled brood. You can't do anything about that. That's the queen getting over-rambunctious with some warm weather, expanded the brood nest on that 1 frame too much. And of course, they had to cluster tightly with the cold weather, and therefore you had chilled brood. So you got to be careful that, but this is what your goal is, to have at least 8 frames, both sides, by the middle of May, because they're building, and they need those 8 frames to build up to a peak of 60,000 bees. And if you close it down with honey bound them, then you're not going to have a strong hive by the middle of May. And you might have a hive that starts to get weaker and weaker because there's no new bees hatching and bees are dying. Keep in mind, these bees are only going to be living 6 weeks. And if you don't have 8 frames of brood, they're not going to come back. They're going to get weaker. And that's why when I go out through the summer inspection, I can see right away the hives that are honey bound. I can see the hives are much weaker than they were earlier in the spring. So be aware of that. That's management right there, not overfeeding, but making sure there's enough for them to support. Okay, go ahead. And of course, always good to make sure you get your honey supers on in time. This is an issue that if they have no place to put it, guess where they're going to put the honey? They're not going to stop saying, oh, we're going to clog up they will clog up both brood chambers with honey. It doesn't seem that, that's by nature that should happen, but it does. I've gone into hives with no more than a softball size of brood. Everything else was pollen and honey. I don't know how many times, hundreds of times. And I can see right away what's happening to those hives. They're getting weaker and weaker instead of with that 8 frames. And once they reach the 60,000, with the 8 frames, they can stay at 60,000 until the fall when the numbers start to recede. Going into the winter cluster, they end up with about 35,000. They don't stay at 60,000 going into the winter cluster. Okay, so you can see, make sure here's one of my locations last year. You can see 5 supers of honey, 4 supers of honey, 3 supers and a couple, first one there, I had taken off one, but one hive got a bad start. I had a bad queen. You can see the small hive there, the orange got off with a bad queen. I had to requeen and it got set back some. So you can see what happens with setbacks. You don't get the honey. When you see all those other hives with 2 to 5 supers of honey, you notice something wrong in that one hive because they should all be pretty equal. Go ahead. And that's what I'm talking about, honey-bound frames. I see frames like this, the whole top super, and 4 frames in the bottom, all honey, and the rest of them with all pollen. And I've seen hives, no brood whatsoever. Midsummer, queen's there, no room. The excluder's on. She can't move up. She can't move anywhere. She's just unable to lay, and the hive's going to get weaker. It's called honey-bound or honey pollen bound, we call them. And that's what you got to keep an eye on. Keep that rule of 8 or 8 frames. Go ahead. And here's pollen bound. I've found hives with at least 6 or 7. Some years the pollen comes in like crazy. Other years it doesn't. So this is a pollen bound, honey bound together, destructive if you don't leave brood space. What do? Spin out. If you don't have extra built out frames, you spin out 5 frames of honey, 6 frames, whatever you need to produce brood space. You can save those frames, put them in a freezer, and in the fall, instead of feeding sugar syrup, guess what? You have instant honey frames to put in. You take them out of the freezer, keep them at room temperature for 5 days, and then before the winter, they go into winter cluster, put those honey frames in then. And you don't have to feed sugar syrup, which is no nutrients, whereas honey's got nutrients, and the bees are going to be winter much better because they're getting nutrients from what they're eating as opposed to getting just carbohydrates. And here the pollen, the same thing. Okay, go ahead. And of course, you can go to the opposite extreme and it can be dearth. Now, what is a dearth? If the temperatures are too hot, if the temperatures are too dry, if the conditions are too dry, we haven't had rain for 4 weeks, like some years, 3, 4 weeks, everything is drying up. The plants automatically, what they do is close down their nectaries. And this is what else gets bees angry. You see, for a certain period of time, the bees all of a sudden get angry. It's not a skunk. It's they can't get any nectar. They've been going to flowers getting nectar, and all of a sudden the nectar is shut down. We had Professor Zampini speak to us a few years. She's the expert on nectar flows and what causes them and what shuts them down. And like you said, some plants will shut down the nectaries if they got shallow roots very quickly if you get a dry spell. Other plants, it's a longer period. If it's a tree, it's going to be even a longer period. So all plants, trees shut down the nectaries in stress to preserve energy. That means the bees now don't have any nectar, pollen, and if it's a long dearth period, I found starved hives in July out in Middlefield, out in the Berkshires. People thought it was a pesticide kill. It was 2 starved hives. And they thought because there's goldenrod and everything out there that the bees had plenty. That's not the case. There's probably plenty of flowers, but there's a dearth on. I got some hives on scales. So I know, I can tell right away, is the nectar going up or is it dropping? And it's a good thing to have. If you got a scale to put a hive on, you can tell whether nectar's not coming in or is it coming in? The scale's going up, means nectar's coming in. And that's how I know. I got 26, my record is 26 pounds of nectar in 1 day from a beehive. Very strong one, filled up a whole super, shallow super with nectar in 3 days. The nectar, that's of course, a lot of that is water that they have to fan. But a dearth means it's a period when there's no nectar and even pollen. And they eat up, they use it up for the young larva and brood. And guess what? The hive is now empty and we're in a dearth. And you got to make sure you know that's what your job is as the beekeeper. Is there ample food? Just like the other extreme, honey bound, pollen bound. The other extreme, no pollen, no honey, and the bees starve. And I've seen it. I remember a few years back, I was in Barry, Mass. That we had a long spell. It's probably about 4 or 5 years now, but the people in Barry probably remember that. As I went through, I'm, I'm telling everybody, you got to feed, you got to feed. Everybody in Barry started feeding because through that area, we were okay down in the southern part of the county, but up there they hadn't had rain for a month and a half or so. And through that northern part of the county, there was a dearth, which I found surprising, but I came to realize different parts of the same county can have different conditions and cause your hives maybe starve, whereas it's okay down in the southern part of the county. And nutritional deficiency, it often is confused with European flower brood. But when there's no nectar, no pollen, there's the bees, the larva, there's nutritional deficiency, and the larva is drying up, become crusty, like you see there in the middle cell there. And you could probably point to it. Yeah, there you go. And there's one on the left here, and they're drying out. You can see they're not nice and glistening. Remember in the last session, I showed you how it's nice and glistening. You can see right up in that little cell, there's no brood food in there. There's no brood food that the bees, because there's no honey, no pollen. So the bees, the nurse bees, can't feed the larva. If you're seeing this, check if you got honey and if you got pollen in the hive. If not, you better quickly feed. It only takes 3, even in the summer, 3, 4 days, and your hive will starve. So always be aware of that. And of course, this winter, since February 12th, I've been inspecting. You don't know how many starved hives I found out there. They act with nice brood had already started, but no food, and it's sad. So and I always tell this story. A few years back, one of the beekeepers thought it was pesticide kill. They were all in a big cluster at the top, and even coming heaped up over the tops of the top chamber frames. And they said, what is it, pesticide kill? Because I went up there to take a sample. That's unusual in the winter. And I said to the beekeeper, and I won't mention names here, but I said to her, she says, what is it, pesticide kill? I said, no. Look at the little brown eyes looking up at you and saying, why'd you do this to us? I said, they starved. And tears started rolling down her face. I felt so bad after that. I'll never do that again. But it can happen. But if you constantly check in, that's why I say be a beekeeper, not a beehaver, because it can happen to anybody. But if you're into your bees, monitoring your bees, it's less likely to happen. In the summer, there should be no reason why there should be no reason why they starve. Because if you're in there, there's no honey, no pollen. Now you got to give them pollen patty. You got to give them some honey or sugar syrup, or mix some honey with. But always keep in mind, use only your own honey. You don't know. Honey carries American flower brood spores, bacteria, and European. So if you buy in commercial honey, you start feeding to your bees, you could. So do not, unless you know your friend and that's healthy bees, do not ever feed other honey that you don't know about to anybody. So nutritional deficiency, honey bound, dearth, and lack of honey and pollen are all issues you got to deal with all season long. Okay. And a good little tip here. Now it's warmer. Like I've got my honey frames I'm taking them out there room temperature. I've been putting in, instead of sugar syrup, and a lot of them, I've been taking out the ones that were honey bound last fall, taking those frames now and putting them right next to the brood. And when you put one in there, boy, they'll get right over that frame and they'll just gnaw away at it. Believe me, I put about 40, 50 frames out. I had 118 honey bound frames here from last fall. And right at the end, they really packed it in, and you had to keep the brood chambers open. And So you put in built out frames. And here's another little tip. Well, where do I get built out frames from? If I put these in the freezer, I suggest every new beekeeper in the spring when they can build a wax, instead of putting a honey super on, put a deep chamber on, let them build out the frames in a deep chamber. And guess what? Now you got built out deep frames for being able to replace honey-bound frames in your hive, saving the honey-bound frames without having to spin them out, which is a lot of work. And secondly, you've got, in case you get swarming or swarm buildup, if you take out frames of brooding bees, you now can put in built out comb so the queen can keep laying. Okay, go ahead. And of course, that's ideal. You know, honey like that, that's an okay frame to count as one of your 8 frames, just so you see there an example. Go ahead. And of course, this is the starvation. There's a nice, beautiful cluster. I took this picture the other day, and that one had five frames of brood. The bees were dead right there, you know, and it was sad. All starved. They last 3 days and they're dead. The head's right in. Go ahead. And there you can see all the bees. See them all over the brood. This is the cluster. Was when there's a few other frames. Was five frames, bees and brood and starved. Go ahead. Now you'll be getting your packages. You can see here, and this one here, it almost looks like it 2 separate packages. That's all one, and they've created like a double arch at the bottom. But you'll be getting your bees. Now, what's important is I'm going to throw in here with packaged bees is it is important, even if you've got built out frames, you got a dead hive, you're going to be putting the package on, bring the frames in a week early, bring them to room temperature. Those thick frames of honey, they take 4 days in room temperature to heat that honey right through the whole frame. I got a food tomorrow you can stick right in, and 4 days at room temperature to totally heat that honey up to room temperature. And then when you get ready to set up your hive for the package, bring it out that day, especially you people getting the earlier packages. You don't want, because you shake a package on those ice cold frames, they have a hard time. Many of them drop to the bottom. It's hard for bees on real cold frame. And the honey, you want it so they can consume it. Room temperature, 68, 70 degrees is what they need those heated to. And it's going to take, if you have that ice cold honey, it's going to take the bees 3 or 4 days to warm that honey up so they can consume it. So a crucial thing here for you folks that are going to be putting packages on the empty dead out hives to have them warm and room temperature, those bees, you'll see them cluster right on comfortably instead of kind of shirking away from those cold frames. Again, I put that in here as for you to understand what to do, because too many just leave it outside. April 14th, it's going to be cold nights, cold mornings. That honey and frames will be ice cold. And guess what? That's not good for the bees being shaken onto that. Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, and now about feeding those, you want to hear about anywhere from 9 to 12 holes. And what you do is put half of a jar instead of a whole jar and fill it more often. That way, because overnight, if they don't use it up during the whole day, at night it gets so cold, they go down in the cluster. Now that syrup is cold, the bees have to come up in the morning around the neck of the jar and warm it up so the bees down below can take it. And by the way, before you don't tip it over on top of the bees, especially if it's cold syrup. Tip it out just on the side of your hive, flip the jar over, let it set the vacuum, and then put the jar on that little inner cover hole so that the bees don't leak down on bees, especially if it's cold. And you're going to have some cold days still with those packaged bees, and you don't want real cold syrup dripping down on the bees. Go ahead. And of course, this is a sign that those bees were very close to starving. See how they come up right over the top? There were hardly any down below. This is a case, they were lethargic. They already loss of energy, heat, they weren't moving. I took quickly and we drizzled syrup in through that cluster. Went back in an hour. I came back later in the day just to see. And we both opened up, the beekeeper and I both opened it up. And guess what? They'd come back to life. And then he started feeding and fed him sugar syrup. But that was within a day of starvation. That's what it looks like. They just came right over. They'd eaten up the sugar patties. There was nothing else to eat. They came right to the top and were on the verge of starvation. So that's what it looks like. If you're seeing that, quickly get some food. And bees that have not much energy, not much food, they're lethargic. In the summertime, if that's the case and there's no nectar pollen, you took your honey super off and didn't realize there's nothing down below, guess what? They're going to starve. So always monitor that situation. And if you're seeing the bees aren't flying, they're just lethargic at the top, you know that more than likely that no food. They have no energy left. So go ahead. And that's, see, here again, the sugar patty. Threw that sugar patty right on. They got right on it. And right here, this was another one here, and they got right onto the sugar patty and they were taking it down like nothing. The whole cluster was there taking it because they were on a point of starvation. Go ahead. Now this is, you don't see this every year. I saw 6 to 7 cases of this year. This is suffocation. Now, remember I was speaking earlier about a mouse guard and entrance reducer? What happened here is the dead bees that got blocked up, they couldn't get it out. They couldn't get the bees out. The beekeeper wasn't going around every week and a half, 2 weeks, pulling out the dead bees. The front entrance with the entrance reducer in the mouse guard there, it got clogged up and there was no air coming in. There was no upper entrance he had. The inner cover was down flat, the outer cover on top of it. These bees suffocated. You notice how they're around the whole rim, the outside rim of the hive? If you could kind of and show them around the whole outer rim. That's where the bees were, and they were wet and moist and suffocated. And I'll show you in a minute the bottom border results in this hive. These bees were trying to get in between the 2 cracks, get the last of the air between the 2 cracks of the 2 deep supers. And this, you don't see this in most years, but this year with it been so cold, the bees haven't been able to come out and cleanse. And I've seen more cases this year than I have in the last 7, 8 years. Go ahead. See all the dead out? See the dead, thick with dead bees? You feel so bad. You see all those just suffocated. They couldn't get in the air. They died from suffocation. So that was a sad case. And I've seen 5 or 6 this year, and probably more than, because I'm just, everybody don't call for dead out inspections. Go ahead. And see how this one, they're all up against the front. See the mouse guard there on the front? And the bees it's blocking totally. They were trying to get out. They couldn't. They suffocated right there. Were suffocated. So make sure you 2 things. Have an up entrance at all times. If it's a little notch, I like to put popsicle sticks on my rims. I put the popsicle sticks on the 4 corners of the hive and put my inner cover down on that. It leaves a little 1/16 of an inch space, so they can always get air if the entrance gets blocked. Just a 1/16 of an inch. I keep them all winter. And I got the little notch in the inner cover, and then I just use the entrance reducer and I clean it every 2 weeks. I go in there with a hanger, pull all the bees, take the entrance reducer out gently, not to rattle the bees, and pull out all the dead bees. So there's air coming in, and the moist air going out, because you don't want a lot of moisture in your hive. As the bees eat honey, they respirate, there's moisture being released. And if you get excess moisture on the inner cover, it leaks down onto the bees. It's like a refrigerator effect with 20-degree temperatures outside. So here again, always the entrance reduces. Air ventilation is an important aspect of beekeeping. You need, and people say, well, isn't that too cold? No, most people think that the whole hive is heated up. I've got some USDA scales I monitor for the USDA, and you can tell right away. We've got a sensor down at the lower corner of the hive. We got one right in the center of the cluster. The center of the cluster when it's 98, when there's brood rearing, and when there's no brood rearing, it's about 65 to 70. And it takes them about a week to week and a half to bring that temperature up to 93. At that point, I know that there's going to be eggs being laid because they need to have it at 93. Now, down the lower corner of the colony, you know what the temperature is? It's only 5 degrees warmer than the outside temperature. There's not a major difference because the air's moving in, moves through the hive, pulls the moisture out, and the bees vent it right out through the top. They have a great ventilation system, but you got to have the openings for them. If they get blocked, you haven't cleaned the entrance reducer, got all the dead bees out, now you're going to see suffocation. Okay, that's one that's not often talked about, but it is something that happens in hives. Go ahead. Now, evaluating your hive at the end of the season. You can let hives go, weaker hives, stronger hives, but at the end of the season, the beginning of October, you got to make a decision. Brood is going to start being cut back now. Is this hive strong enough to make it through the winter? And then you make a decision. No, it really isn't. Get a mentor or the bee inspector, and if it's not strong, it's got 3 frames of brooding bees. You might want to move it to a nuke box, but unlikely you're going to make. Your best bet is to combine that with newspaper to a stronger hive. Have one real strong hive, which I always prefer. Every year, I must do 6 or 7 combines where I evaluate hives that possibly something happened to the queen and the hive got weaker, or there was a supersedure, the queen didn't make it. So at the end of the season, I evaluate and I combine. And I'd rather have one strong hive rather than 2 weak hives going into the winter. And so you take a piece of newspaper in the evening, bring the hives close together, and then in the evening, what you do is take it gently, the inner cover and outer cover off of the hive that you're going to leave the queen in. So if it's this hive here, then what you do is take your other chamber with the inner cover, outer cover, and just set the whole thing at night. In October, it's cold nights. You set it right on top of the newspaper. The bees will chew through. Make sure you take your queen out of the weaker hive before you do this and put it on top and combine. And at the end of the season, you as the beekeeper got to make this evaluation. I know it's a tough one. You'd like to keep it, and so you have 2 hives going in, but believe me, it's better off to have 1 hive strong than 2 hives that are weak. So this is an issue that you're going to be making in October. If you don't have another hive and nothing you can do, then your next best bet is to take and try to winter it in a nuke. Take some of the frames of honey from a stronger hive and put 2 frames of honey and pollen in, and those 3 frames of brood or 4 frames of brood. If you got more than that, then you might leave it and try to winter it in 1 deep chamber. But that's a tough wintering also. So you make that evaluation. Go ahead, next. So there's what it looks like. You combine them into the winter. So, you have 1 strong hive going. Now, before we go there, back one more and back up. Here's another thing that you can cause. When you take your frames out to examine bees, never want to examine a hive below 60 degrees. When it's 60 degrees, you can go in and quickly do a check. Till it's 65, you don't want to do any long-term checks in a beehive because you're going to get chilled brood. A lot of people make this mistake. 50, 55, you know, what you want to do is 60 and up, you can make a quick check. 65 and over, you can stay in there sometime. But the careful thing is here, in the colder temperatures, don't take one frame with brood and put it into your frame holder while you inspect the other hives. Because it doesn't take long to chill the brood on a frame. And then you'll see puncture marks in the brood cappings. And all of a sudden, how many times do I get called? People do this and they get called. I think mites or something. Can you come out and see what it is? Just chill brood because it turns black. They uncap it, turns black, and bees stop pulling out the chill brood. It's what happens when the queen overlays too many eggs and the brood nest too big. We get a cold spell. They have to constrict their cluster in order to keep it 95, and the outer perimeter gets chill brood. So you can do that by taking a frame out, leaving a frame holder at, say, 60 degrees. At 60 degrees, that brood is going to chill in 15 to 20 minutes at 60 degrees. So be careful. And in the summertime, when you take out frames, put them in a frame holder, you think, well, geez, it's warm, they won't chill. The other extreme is putting in a frame holder, you got the sun baking down on that frame. And what you get is suffocated or overheated brood, and what kills the brood in that whole frame, and you lose a whole frame of brood. So temperature, seasonal issues, you've got to know when to deal with it, when to go into the hive, and when not to go into the hive as well. And you realize seasonal also affects dearths with great nectar flow, honey bound. So you got to know to put your honey supers on. Usually by the end of April, you should, if you got overwintered hives, you should be putting honey supers on, at least one honey super. So if a nectar flow all of a sudden comes from the maples or comes from some early plants, you've got a honey super that they can start. Because once they start filling up the brood chambers, they finish them. And now you got to spin out. So get your honey supers on early enough, get them used to going right up and putting the nectar. Because once they start and filling up the brood chamber, they're going to finish it and you're going to end up honey bound. And now you got to spin out. All right. So go ahead. Now we're going to talk about some of the other issues, we call them. One of them that some of you are going to encounter more than you think sometime is pesticide issues. Now, this is an example of a hive that the pesticides drifted into the hive and obviously killed thousands of bees in the hive. The bottom board was covered all over the front entrance there. The farmer, obviously, if you're near a farm, if you're near anybody, mosquito spraying, anything where there's a drift. Farmers, landscapers, pesticide people are usually somewhat familiar, but not always. So you should talk to your neighbors if they're using anything to let you know. And if they do it early in the morning or more in the evening, you can close up with a damp rag in front of your hive and close it up early in the morning. So if they're doing it in the morning, your bees haven't gone out to the field yet. And for about a couple hours, you could keep them closed up with a wet towel in front. So your bees aren't out on the apple trees or up on the some kind of plants and they're spraying for something, because you will never know that type of pesticide kill. Because, for instance, a good example of that is spraying for apples, plums, peaches. There's dandelions down on the ground. Well, guess what? The bees are going for the dandelions. They're spraying the trees. You're getting what we call a field kill. You don't even know. The bees are getting whacked right out in the field. The only way you'd know is one day you see thousands of bees coming in and out of hive collecting nectar, pollen. The next day you don't see any field force because your field force was killed out in the field. So always talk to the farmer, ask them when they're going to spray to let you know, and ask him if he can spray early in the morning. That way you can keep your wet towel on till 7 or 8. You don't want much more beyond 9 because you don't want to suffocate them or overheat them in there. So, but if they do it in the morning, that's beneficial, or at night after 9. And that way your bees on out in the field on the dandelions and whatever. You got to work with your farmer friends, or if you're near the farms, ask them, to cooperate with you, and that way you're going to avoid something like this. And then go ahead. Another you can do if they're like mosquito spraying, or if the farmer is spray, put some sheets, old white sheets out in front of the hives, and you're going to see whether there's any kill. Sometime what happens, some of the bees that get partially hit, you'll see them coming back with pollen the next morning. That residue was on the plants. The half-life is pretty quick, but oftentimes they're on a plant, they bring back in the pollen baskets, they get back and they die with the pollen sac still on. The bees kick them out, throw them out, and you'll see it in your hive. You're seeing pollen baskets with bees out in front and they're dead. It's indicated that they got hit, but no, they made it back to the hive in with the pollen, but died, and then the bees drag them out. So that's a good end of the mosquito spraying. They're always, or the central mass, it's staying, you usually get one. If you're a beekeeper and tell your town hall you want to register as a beekeeper, they'll tell you, put signs out at each end of your property, no spray, and you're registered as having bees. They'll skip your property, because if your hives are right toward the front near the street, and Central Mass, the mosquito division, comes by and sprays, that's going to drift right into your hives. And we've seen that, not so much because now they have the program where you give them your name and address at the town clerk's office, say you got honeybees, you don't want your property sprayed. This has lessened the effect of bee kills. But the sheets are a good thing to put anyway if they're going to spray your street, and that way, or if the person says they're going to spray next door for mosquitoes, you can do this and see if you're getting any kill. Okay, go ahead. Oversaturation. Here you can see, this is oversaturation. All these hives in one area, there's not enough nectar. And this is an oversaturation, by the way. This is commercial hives, commercial outfits where they bring their hives back to one location, uh, and before they send them down south. But in many cases, most of us now here in Central Mass are oversaturated in areas, because in Northbridge we used to have 5 beekeepers, probably about 25 hives, and now we have 39 and over 100 and something hives. You can't go more than a half mile without beehives, which is a great thing, but for honey production, it's not a good thing, because you don't have enough nectar flow, especially now what I call the $10,000 carpet lawn. No dandelions, no chickweed, no anything. All, and that used to be all goldenrod fields, dandelion fields. Now with the new projects, so a lot of areas aren't good for nectar flow. If you're in one of these huge neighborhoods, everybody's got that type of lawn, there's no dandelions and no flowers, it's just a perfect lawn. Then what happens is your bees are going further and further to try to find food sources. And that ties in with the fact of oversaturation. Now, if you got, beside not enough foraging, you also got 20 hives near you, all looking for food. You know what happens? None of them get enough. And as a result, check out your area and see what's out there. How many hives? Ask around, and you can ask your town hall, how many are registered for non, and that gives you an idea. We can't release names, but at town hall they can tell you how many are registered for non-spray. They won't give you names, but you get an idea of how many hives are in the area and registered. So, and if it's too many in your neighborhood, you might think of moving your hives to a more rural setting. where you got a better food source for the bees. Because keep in mind, you want your bees to have honey, not sugar syrup. They're going to be healthier by all means. So oversaturation is a big issue, especially in the fall when they need the honey for the winter and the pollen, and they can't get it. Putting in pollen patties and sugar syrup is not a good substitute. So as a result of that, you need to take action. All right, and go ahead. And of course, be aware of your neighbors. You got a neighbor that's got a swimming pool, like the next door neighbor to here, and the swimming pool is right there. We get into a dirt. You're supposed to put water out for the bees, but don't put a plastic bird bath with water. If you're going to take a cement bird bath, put a lot of dirt, soil with rocks in it. They don't like perfectly clean water unless it has minerals in it. So with the soil and the rocks, they're getting minerals and they like that kind of water. Murky water, much better than clean water. But the swimming pools have minerals in them. And the bees need minerals. That's why they go to the muddy spots in swamps and whatever. They're drawing the minerals as well as the water. But if you got neighbors, it could create a problem, because what happens is if they got a party, and there's all bees along the outside edge of the swimming pool, they're not going to be too happy. So create a water source for your bees early in the spring so they have a source to go to, they get used to, and not go into your neighbor's pools. And the other thing about neighbors, make sure your flight line for your hives isn't across the neighbor's property. In other words, 10 feet from their sidewalk. When anybody's coming in the sidewalk, the bees are flying out and getting stuck in their hair and stinging them. So obviously, these are other issues that I'm talking about, even though not affecting the hives, it's affecting you and your relationship with neighbors. And that's important because some of the towns, health boards have required people to move their hives out. If there's a health complaint and the neighbor complains, guess what? They're going to maybe have me come out and see it's a problem. You got to move your hive. The health board required to move your hives, and then you have no choice. So, try to avoid neighbor issues by not having your flight path. Your hives maybe on the opposite side of your yard, the back part where there's no house, and where the neighbors aren't having a cookout and the bees are flying across their lawn and stinging their cookout parties. Last year, because of COVID, we didn't have too much problem with that. That was one of the things. We didn't see too many complaints because nobody was out in their yards with cookouts for the most part. So go ahead. And of course, like I say, you want to be a beekeeper like these folks. They're great family of beekeepers, and you notice everybody gets into the act. They painted up their own hives. All the three young ladies painted up their hives and had a great time doing it. And they're beekeepers for whatever that worth. I say beekeeper, not a bee haver. And go ahead. And as I started off here, I was at a location here on a pond. I was inspecting beehives, and I had two more to go. And all of a sudden, I waited. I said, I'm not going to come back all the way down on the Cape here. I'm not going to come back. I waited. The rain waited out. Then the sun came out, and I've never seen it in my life, a double rainbow. I looked up and thought of that song I used to sing to my wife. I'll build you a rainbow. If you want me to sing it at some meeting, I will for you. But anyway, I bought a scratch ticket going home. I hit for $1,000. So now I believe that double rainbows bring you a pot of gold. So again, I'll finish up here by saying you've got to learn to read your hive. No, by going in hives, read them, watch the bees, what they do, what they like, what they don't like, quick actions, what happens versus moving slow, not rattling your hive. Some people I see them prying off that inner cover, just rip it off, that cracking noise. or they move quickly across the hive, they get stung. I can work a hive for an hour and nice weather where it's not raining, the weather's fine, the temperature's warm enough so they don't have to worry about the brood chilling because they're protective of that. The cold temperatures, unless it's too cold and at the other extreme, they can't move themselves, so they can't do anything. But when the temperatures in that moderate range, they'll start stinging because they're trying to keep their house warm for the brood. So learn to read your bees, know what your bees like, what they don't, what they need, what they don't need, and you'll be a better beekeeper for it. And it's taken me, 70 years of beekeeping, and people say, you come across probably every problem there is in beekeeping. I probably haven't. Maybe there's some problems that I haven't. I never thought about lightning before, but 4 or 5 times I come across that. So it's not a big enough problem that's going to affect you probably in your whole lifetime. But I decided to touch on it. But I want to, these two, I did part 1 and part 2. I want to dedicate these 2 parts to the beekeepers of Massachusetts. And we'll have these put on thumbnail drives into our library. They'll be there for a long time. And hopefully I'll be long gone. Oh, I remember that guy that produced those 2. I was a young person back then, just like I now say to people, geez, I remember Warren Richardson back in the 1950s when he was president, and he taught me many things. So anyway, I end this presentation. I'll take your questions now and hopefully be able to answer them.
Okay, I'm going to start sharing here. So if you have a question, please use the raise hand. You can find that at the bottom under reactions. It could be at the bottom of participants, or it could be at the top where it says more and there's 3 dots. So our first question is from Susan Patterson. You want to unmute and ask your question, Sue? And the next one will be from D. Rhoda.
Oh, yeah, Sue, I was at your house the other day. I was going to come out and then I didn't, right? You're Bolton?
That's right. Yes. Yep. I have a couple of questions. One was about the small hive beetle trap. Right. Where does that trap go? Is it go on the bottom board? Does it go on
from the small hive beetle you're talking about?
Yes.
No, you can get that throughout the frames and into the pollen, in the areas where they lay the larva. You'll see it all there because then the larva will leave. So they're just letting go throughout the, and it's a atrocious smell.
So you mentioned a small trap you can buy for 99 cents. Where did you put that?
You put that between the frames, and it's got holes in the top, clear plastic on the top. It's black on the bottom, and you put it between your frames. You'd put one in your bottom brood chamber, one in your top brood chamber, and that trap would captures for the most part. On the Cape, where they get so many of them because of sandy soil, they need to soak their soil all around the hive with a certain type of pesticide.
Great. And what about ant traps? I have my hive on a cement blocks. So how would I get maybe ant traps? Because I can't do motor.
No, ants are going to just avoid the ant trap. If you got cement blocks, take the motor grease and coat your blocks with the motor grease. Just take a brush and coat the whole cement block, because a lot of people have done that. The whole cement block is coated with motor grease.
Excellent.
And you probably have to renew it twice during the summer, where you just take the brush and hit all parts of the cement block. You don't have to do the under part, as long as they can't walk up the top part and underneath in the first, those openings in the cement block, and they'll avoid it.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah.
Okay, D.R. Rhoda is next, and then Mike.
Yep, I can. So my question is, for the average area, let's say you're in a woodland area, how many hives do you think you can keep, assuming you don't have a bunch of neighborhood beehives?
Yeah, I'm looking at 5 to 6 hives in our area, southern Worcester County. We got a lot of beekeepers. We got 42 in Uxbridge. We got Grafton with 40 something beekeepers. No more than 6. And that's if you haven't got somebody else with 8, 10 hives. I find they're competing. You're not getting the honey production. So you got to look around. Or what area you looking at? What town? Leominster?
Harvard, Leominster, yeah.
Yeah, Leominster's got a lot of beekeepers. They 39, 40 right in there. So you got to find areas where, and try it out. Sometimes you have to try it out and see. And if in 2 years you're seeing, they're not getting much honey, then it's probably a problem. And 1 year, sometime it could be the weather, the seasonal conditions, and there was a bad honey flow. In 1958, there was zero honey that we got. It was just a bad year throughout the whole year. But most years, if you're not averaging 50 pounds per hive, that you should be around 50 in today's day and age. 50 pounds is, even in the slower years, I get 50, two medium supers of honey for the most part. So you got to feel it out. And sometimes it's what's there, what's in the area, scout around. Like I got certain areas, there's loads of Russian olive, black locust trees, and then in the fall there's goldenrod. Look through the seasons, what's there. That's the other judgment I should have mentioned, that check around through the seasons. You don't want something that's just in one season. There's something there for them throughout all the 3 seasons around here. The 4th season, there's nothing. Spring, we got, the maples that start off, and then you got all your berries, your apples, all your fruit trees coming in. You get black locust, it's later spring, early summer. You got Russian olive, early, late spring there. So check around and only try it out. And if you're seeing there's not more than, you're not getting that, then time to maybe look for another place.
Thanks.
Okay, Mike, you're next, followed by Karen.
Hey, Ken, pulling honey bound frames and spinning them out and putting them back in. Pollen bound frames, what to do with them other than set them to the side?
Yeah, nothing you can do with pollen bound frames except give them maybe to hives that don't have so much if you have more hives, because they will use it right now. Took they're mostly on the bottom. I took them, put them up near the brood of my strong hives, and they're taking it. Boy, they're taking that because the cold weather, they're not able to get pollen now. And I ran out of my trap pollen, so I put those pollen frames up close, and they're going right after it. But how many hives do you have?
Right now is 0 as dead outs, but I'll be back up to 4.
Yeah. Well, then what you'll have, Steve, is Mike. What you'll have is they'll need that pollen. Put it right next to your frame, your brood frames, where you're going to put open 3 in the middle. Then put a honey frame on one side, a pollen frame full of pollen on the other side, and then keep expanding your brood nest by moving the pollen frame and the honey frame out. And if you need to get another pollen frame or honey frame, that's how you use it up.
Okay, Karen, you're next, followed by Linda.
Hi, Ken.
Whoa.
So you mentioned by mid-May, we should hopefully have like 60,000 bees at our strongest point to get our hive through the winter. Now, with the packages being delayed, we're not getting it until May 15th. How do you see that affecting things?
Well, you're not going to, you with a package, even if you started early, you're not going to have with a package, you're not going to have, I'm talking an overwintered hive by the end of May, early June, you're going to be at peak. That's when the hive will peak and then start to swarm. But with package bees, you are even though you got built out comb, honey, and whatever, your hive will not, because you're only getting 3 pounds of bees, and they're only going to have a softball size of brood because there's only X amount of bees to keep the brood warm. So you will build your peak by August. Early August, middle August is when you'll come to your peak numbers. So it's going to be behind. That's why I always say, remember in the swarm segment I talked about, you people with packages have got to worry about swarming in August because they're not going to build to peak till then. So yeah, it's a totally different ball game, overwintered versus package hive started in April or May. Because
but even with them being delayed this year, you think
it's going to be a delay in your buildup?
it will be
Absolutely.
even later?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's going to be a delay, and nothing you can do because down there with the cold weather now, I heard there's even more problems. had this cold weather coming in, this long storm system. So I'm waiting to see if anything else is going to happen with the Georgia bees. But hopefully it won't be too much more of a delay. But I know the first package is not coming until like the middle of April there. And then the
Right.
next shipment is it's like second, third week of May. So there's going to be a big delay this year. Nothing we
Okay.
can do.
Right. Right. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Linda, you're next. And then there are a few questions on the chat, so I'll go to those after Linda.
Thank you. Hey, Ken, it's Linda in Belchertown.
Yeah.
And I fortunately have two
Is it
hives
Linda
that have
Linda
overwintered
Ledoux?
successfully. I'm trying to learn more about the pollen colors that they're coming in, and when we have you know, the nectar coming in. I don't understand that really well. Are there some good resources? And also, when should I be putting my supers on for this first nectar flow? I know everything is climate related or weather related, but what are your suggestions generally?
Okay. First of all, what's coming in right now on the warmer days, a little bit was coming on, is maple pollen is green. I started to see
Green.
3 days ago. It's a greenish gray in color. Then the crocuses are the orangey color you're seeing coming in. The pussy willow is the light yellow color. Those are only three. Arctic swill is a navy blue. I love that pollen the most. It's a navy. That's been coming in. And witch hazel is a white. So if you're near some of those, so I've seen 5 colors altogether. And then as far as nectar, I haven't seen too much. The maples have just been out in the last 3-4 days. They start, and as soon as they get a warm spell, that nectar will start to flow. And that's good. That's the beginning. The bees seem to really build with the first nectar that comes in from the trees. So that's coming in. A good book on that is if you look under I'm trying to think of his name. He's a Canadian beekeeper. Look under, well, if you look under books on pollen, you'll get that title. There's a book, it talks, we when I was part of the USDA study, we used to send them down to the APHIS lab down in Biloxi, Mississippi, and they'd analyze all the pollens for us. So we get out, and I can tell you because I got the results, the top 3 pollens they analyzed for the spring season, early summer, late summer, and then the fall. And what were the major pollens in our area? Of course, that varies. The early spring pollens we found the top 3 were the Russian olive, was the dandelion pollen, and the tree, the white tree with the along 190 and 290 there, black locust. So those are the key pollens with late spring. Then the other, late summer, the big one was sumac. Once all those some sumac, it used to be purple loosestrife in summer. Those were the 2 big ones. And then the fall was the goldenrod, Joe pieweed, Japanese knotweed. So, but that book, if you look in the pollens and books on pollen sources, there's a couple. One's by a Canadian beekeeper. I think his name was Dr. Zabo, SCABO.
Thank you. I worry when I search it that it's not from our region. So I don't.
No, they have usually, that book has from the different regions what the major.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
There was a good chart on Google at one point too, it was just a pollen chart.
Yeah.
That just showed all the different colors and where they came from.
Yeah. If the club has any access to share some general, I remember seeing that a while ago and I haven't been able to come up with it again. And then I'm having a hard time just finding out a general nectar flow. I know it changes seasonally, but I'm trying to get an idea of when I'm supposed to be like managing my supers. Well,
your supers, okay, that I didn't answer that part of the question. Your supers, you put them on it once you got 5, 6 frames of brood, you can put your one super on there. Get them going early into the super. I put them on anything, once it gets to 5, 6 frames of brood, I put my first honey super on, and throw it right on. There's no harm done, and they start putting the nectar right away. Otherwise, they start honey bounding it, and then it's you can't change that trend once they start doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I usually find for me too, when they stop taking my syrup, I put my honey supers on.
Yeah.
So let's see what's in the chat here, Ken. How do you manage? How do you decide when to treat for mites versus when to put honey supers on?
Okay. Now it depends on overwintered hives or package hives. Let me cover overwintered hives first. Pretty much the mite, I've watched this now for 8, 9 years. Overwintered hives, by the end of June, they're at a level of mites that you want to knock them down before you have virus problems. So by the end of June, you want to treat, even before the middle of June, I put my mite away strips on, 2 pads of mite away, not Formic Pro. I found a big difference. The regular formic acid, the real mite away, I put them on in June. The temperatures are good enough for that to get under the cappings. Then the middle of August, I find the mite levels are once again at that level where you don't want them up above. So I treat with mite away again because it gets under the cappings. And keep in mind that 80% of your mites are under the cappings during this period when brood is being reared. So you want to knock the ones under the cappings. That's why mite away in June and August. Now, the next period of we find in this area that the mites are getting to levels. A lot of people used to wait till the end of October, but we're finding mite levels reaching peak at the end of September. And a lot of people that wait till the end of October, that's when they see their crash. That's crucial. So you can always do a mite wash, but at the end of September, you can't use mite away to get under the cappings. So what I'd use is Apivar. I put in 4 strips of Apivar. That's 45 days. Now you have to have your honey supers off, which you would at the end of September anyway, because you need to let the bees build up nectar for themselves for the winter honey. So you got your honey supers off anyway. Put your 4 Apivar strips in. That's 45 days. That takes you to November 15th. And meanwhile, what's happening is all the bees are hatching. The mites are coming out, and you're getting those mites as they come out with the Apivar. And I see a large drop of mites. That period when I put the Apivar strips at the end of September, I see on the bottom board here that I put in a little sticky board with a grid, and that tells me that the Apivar is killing those mites that the bees are brushing against those strips. So I find that as a very good regimen and treatment. Now you can't control mites and your bees robbing from other hives. That you can't prevent, but the Apivar strips to some extent kill those mites as soon as they come into the hive with some of your bees. You know, if they've been robbing mites from the other hive, been jumping on your bees. So as they come in, they hit against the Apivar strips and it kills the mites. Okay?
Okay. Will it ruin the honey in your supers if you start feeding with sugar water during the summer dearth?
Yeah, this is a question that's been asked many, many times. How do you handle that? I said, at that point, you can wait with a dearth. You'll see, evaluate the honey that's in your hive, see what's down there. And you can let it go during the dearth until it's getting on the low side before you start feeding. And then once the honey in the brood chamber is on the low side, you don't want to take any more chances than that. Then you have to pull off that honey super and keep it off for the amount of time that you're feeding. You can quickly feed 2 or 3 gallons very quickly in the summer because they'll take it right down, store it into the thing, and then you can put that honey super right back on. But in most cases, if they're starving, you're best to leave that on because they'll take that down. Believe me, if they're in a starving situation, they'll go up to that honey super and they'll take that all down, bring it down below to the brood nest. So I'd say just leave the super, let them do that. I know some people want it for themselves, but you're better off. And then later on, you may get later honey. So that's my suggestion. Leave the honey super, and if they're starving nothing down below, they'll go up there and get that and bring it down.
Can you keep the mouse guard on all year, like the one you showed in the presentation?
You could, but it blocks up in the summer with the heat, whatever. You want more ventilation. I'd take it off because mice aren't going to go in there. Your mice will never go into a hive that's got bees flying and active because they'll be stung up. So what you do is take it off, and then the end of October, they won't go in before the end of October to nest. So put it in the end of October again. But I take my I use entrance reducers. I take them out about the 15th of May to 20th of May, right in there. I take my entrance. I just leave it wide open. At that point, the bees are strong enough to keep the heat in there. The bees are strong enough to guard the hive, and that way it gives them more ventilation coming in.
Do you recommend adding Fumidil B to sugar syrup in the spring?
If you got new packages, that's already treated. They're treated with the Fumigil. But I highly recommend, you can give them 1 gallon. That's talking to the people from Fumidil B. That's a preventative, and it does keep the spore counts down. No question about that. Test Judy Chen down in Beltsville has done tests with that. She don't feel it's totally effective. But fall, definitely. I used it this fall, and I got very little nosema when others I'm seeing got nosema because the company went out, so people didn't think it was available. But a new company I think it was last March, came in and took over and had it available. So you can get it from Man Lakes. It's quite expensive now because the companies stay in business. They had to go way up in their price, but I think it's well worthwhile. I used it, and I only got 14 hives I lost out of the 100 and some hives, 128 hives.
So what causes a weak hive going into winter, and what do you recommend doing with a weak one if you only have 1 hive and can't combine?
I'd put it into a nuke box. If you got like 3-4 frames of brood, put it into nuke box and take your chances of, or if you got a friend beekeeper or somebody you know, ask them. I've got a few people doing this. One's got 7 hives, one's got 4 hives, and they combine together with their weak hives. But in your case, with only 1 hive, and I'd put it in a nuke box and feed them and keep feeding them once the brood is hatched, because you don't want to block up 4 frames of brood. You want them to create as much brood as possible. So you want at least 3 or 4 frames. So just give them enough food so they don't pack. And then at the end of October is when you really stuff the syrup into them. At that point, you can let them clog up with honey for the winter months with a nuke, and see, wrap it and see if you can get them through. It's tough. It's tough to get nukes through in the winters up here. This year was some of the people that try to winter nukes, two nukes together with a separated board in the middle. They even lost them.
So you take out entrance reducers around May 15th. When do you put it back in?
I put mine, I wait till about the beginning of October to put my entrance reducers back in. Because with the entrance reducers, unlike this, the mice start to think to get in. So I like say sometime in October is when you'd put them back in. Up until then, the bees can handle and vent enough, and there's enough heat still in October that you don't have to, before October, you don't have to put it in.
Okay, Sue Patterson has another question. If you want to unmute and ask your question, Sue.
Yes, I was just wondering if you try to have the bees draw out some comb, so you can have some drawn comb frames. Where do you save that? Is there a special way to save that?
Special way to save the comb.
Yeah,
You just put it right in. The biggest threat is the once you got it built out, then what you do is take it, put it in the freezer for the 72 hours and put it right into a bin. That way, if a wax moth had laid any eggs in those, you wouldn't want it in a warm room and they'd be hatching out, or outside, it's warm enough for the eggs to hatch, and then after the bees took all that effort to build it out, have wax moth destroy it, or mice. By putting it in the bin, you protect it, and then when you need it, you've got it, you take it out, you've got honey-bound frames, you take 3 honey-bound frames out, put them in a freezer, and put them in after 72 hours, put them into a bin, and put your built-out cone right in to the hive, so she can keep laying right away.
And when you say bin, do you mean like a plastic tub?
No, you know these plastic bins that snap down very tight, so the wax moth, the female wax moth, can't get under it.
Okay.
So someone wants to know, do you under super your hives to get them to build new wax faster?
Yeah, if you put built out and unbuilt, they're gonna go to the built out and fill those up. But if you put your foundation, and a trick here is put a little honey on the foundation, spread a little honey with a brush on the foundation, and don't have an excluder when building wax. Do not. She may jump up there and put some brood in, but that's actually causes them to build that honey soup out much quicker, and then just move the queen back down. Yeah, if you take the queen over up into a, with a frame, here's a little trick, move a frame, a shallow frame of brood up into the top super, the medium super, and boy, I'll tell you what, they'll build the rest of that much quicker than if you didn't. So that's a little trick that you can use if you're using medium supers. If you're using mediums, you put a frame of brood up there, and boy, they'll go right up there and build that wax. And if you want wax built, do it between the months of April and the end of July. Once that hot, dry weather comes, they resist building wax and the rest of the year. So all wax that you want built, have it built out right in the beginning of the season, when the nectar flow starts, and that's why I say, once you get your 2 brood chambers built out, pull out, put a 3rd deep on, and spread a little honey on a wax foundation, or move a frame of brood, deep frame of brood up there, and you'll see they'll build it very quickly to expand the brood nest up there. So bring that up with the queen for just a short time. They'll start building the wax. Then you can just move the queen back down. The brood will hatch out. Then you put your excluder on, and I do that a lot.
So newish beekeepers, we had some starve outs, but 3 hives that are just gone. The hive is empty. They were there in October when we last checked. What would cause empty hives?
I'll tell you right now, what cause it, and I'm seeing it all over, is viruses. One of probably 4 or 5 different viruses. Once the virus spreads in a hive, virus bees leave the hive. And that's what everybody thinks, they absconded. They don't abscond that late in the season. What happens is the virus spreads and spreads, and they just leave. I've seen that happen over 3 weeks with a hive, 2-3 weeks, whole hive, no bees in it, and very few sprinkled on the bottom board, and that's viruses.
Somebody wants to know what yellow jacket traps you would recommend.
I don't use any yellow jacket. You probably could go to your hardware stores and which is most effective, and put them there. But I'll tell you what, I've seen beekeepers and it did no good. They still go attack the hives. When there's a lot of yellow jackets in the area, they'll still go after the hives. It does help some in cutting down the numbers, but it's not a total answer to stopping yellow jackets from robbing a weak hive.
I managed last year to, I put a couple of traps up early, and I caught a bunch of really big yellow jackets. I'm assuming they were queens, and I caught like 10 of them. And my yellow jacket problem, I had almost none last year. The year before it was horrible. So I think I got lucky last year and caught a bunch of queens.
Well, what happened? No, what happens? Just so you understand, and I've talked to a number of people on this. Certain winters, more the queens, they say they burrow down into the ground. And
Yeah.
what happens? Some winters where there's a quick freeze and it keeps freezing deeper soil, a lot of queens are killed. They don't make it. And when there's a lighter year and an early snowfall and it insulates the ground, and if ground don't freeze deep, you're gonna have a big yellow jacket problem. So that's the difference between a bad year and a real good year is early snow cover, no, not real cold where the ground freezes deep, and you want the ground to freeze deep and no snowfall. A lot of cold weather before a snowstorm comes, it wipes out a lot of the queens and they don't make it and start nesting in the spring.
Someone says, I had to remove several frames of honey already this spring. Strong hives, rearing brood, and needed space. But the frames were in the hive when I treated with oxalic acid last fall and again this spring. Is it okay to spin them and feed that honey back to the bees?
Yes, it doesn't affect the bees and even humans. As a lot of research shows, I know FDA doesn't allow it, so we have to go by the labels. You can't use oxalic acid with honey supers, but it doesn't affect the bees, and the label has nothing to do with bees. So you can spin that honey, feed it in the sugar syrup, mix it with some, or take hot water. If you're going to give honey, mix a half a cup of hot water for every half gallon of honey and really stir it up good and give it to them warm, room temperature, and only put half because you want them to get that honey, take it down, because once it gets cold, the honey gets real thick and they have a hard time drawing out of jars. So put less. You can make it by the half gallon with hot water, but then really, put it and keep the other half in the house and put it out the next day and take the cold one in, warm it up and stir it up again. And that's the best way to do honey with sugar syrup. Half a cup of hot water with every half gallon of honey, and then you can give it to them. You can even mix some to make it a little more dilutable, some sugar syrup as well, but at least they're getting some honey.
So this is follow up to your empty hive. They said for the viruses that have caused the hive departures, how do you treat for this? I had the same problem. Hive apparently healthy, and they were gone on a warm day in October.
Yeah. What for viruses, the only way to do two things, I should say. One is keep your mite levels low. If you can keep your mite levels low, the research shows that the viruses don't spread nowhere near like when you get heavy mite loads. So keep your mite, but the other problem is here, you can't control if somebody near you has hives that are collapsing full of viruses, your bees are going to go in there and rob out. And as they come in contact with the weaker hive and all those bees that have got the viruses, transmit it through bee to bee. And so for that, I don't know what the answer is. It's everybody taking care of the hives and, and keeping it so that you're only as good as the best beekeeper around you is all I can say. And talk to your neighbors. Tell them, let's all get together. Some of the towns are doing this where beekeepers get together and they all treat on a given Saturday. 4 or 5 of the towns are doing it. I know Harvard, Mass was doing it. And a couple of the other towns near Boston were doing it where all the beekeepers got together and treated and encouraged everybody. And obviously those that don't come into this, I don't know what the answer is. I've got people that non-treatment that don't treat and have losses. You can't force them to treat, but on the other hand, the rest of us will suffer because if they got heavy mite loads and their hives collapsing, your bees are naturally going to rob. There's no way to stop it. I had a gentleman say to me, I'm not asking your bees to come rob my hives out. No, so, what do you say, and I don't know. I don't know that answer and how to deal with it because there's no law that says you have to treat.
Can you reuse frames from hives that had dead outs due to viruses?
Yes, the number of tests have been done. The viruses will not. I've had 4 or 5 hives that I put in. I was curious myself that had 3 viruses in them. I put bees the next year packages. There were no viruses. There were no problem. And then several researchers have also followed up. So it won't come from the equipment. It won't come from the mites are all dead, so they can't transmit the viruses in that hive anymore. So you can reuse the equipment and the frames, the hives themselves, because it would be the mites that would transfer if they were still alive, but they're not. A week after they're dead. And secondly, the viruses also don't transmit from the equipment. So So that's the good thing. You can save your equipment, which is a big, had we had to destroy the frames, that would have been a nasty problem for us to deal with.
What kind of sugar patties do you feed your bees in winter?
I take sugar. I think online, I think on somewhere we have on our website, my recipe, I take sugar and water to make a consistency of a meatball. So when you set that meatball down on the wax paper, it's not kind of falling apart, because it's got too much moisture. You want that meatball to set right there. And then I take and spread it to a 1/4 inch thickness, about 8 inches in diameter. And here's the other mistake I see as I went around with all these winter kills. Never saw so many in one year. You put that patty right overlapping the cluster at the top by about 2 inches. That way the bees can warm it up, and they got brood. Keep in mind, they got brood down there, so they can't go 3 or 5 inches away. You've got to overlap your sugar patty over the top of the cluster, 4, 3, 4, 5 inches, and they can warm it up that way. They can stay in the cluster, and they can take that food down to feed the larvae, and temporarily, even though it's got no nutrients, it's keeping them alive. Well, until we can get, frames of honey next to them. So on a warm day, what you can do, be careful though, take frame of honey from the outside, bring it into the house to warm it up, and then put that honey frame right next to the larva. You can't put a cold frame. Don't take a cold frame from the outside, put it right next to your brood, because it chills the brood on that outside part of the frame, and you lose all that brood. So bring it in, warm it up, and then put it on a warmer day, take and put that nice warm frame. You'll see the bees. I've done it already this year. You see those bees going right after it, and they'd rather have the honey than the sugar patty, believe me.
Would it be good advice to put robbing screens on all hives in August?
It's hard, because when your hive is strong and it's going out, there's not a good ventilation coming in. A strong hive, it won't be any problem. It's on a weak hives, I would say yes. If you got a hive that's weak, yes, but a strong hive don't need it. There won't be robbing in a strong hive. They won't allow yellow jackets or anything to rob it out. These killer wasps, I don't know that they're talking about in Washington, but with what we got here now, we don't have to worry about on a strong hive putting robber screens.
Somebody says they have a whole box of Mite Pro. Should they just throw it out?
No, it's good. It's good to on a date. Now, I just say, if you're going to use the Formic Pro, use the 2 pads in the 7 days. Don't go to 1 and then 1 7 days later. But it isn't as good. I did 3 hives with Formic Pro, 3 hives with Mite Away. There was no comparison. The 3 hives with the Mite Away, I did the alcohol wash after. They had 1, 0, 1. I found in 300 bees. The ones with the Formic Pro were way up higher, 3, 4 mites I was finding. So it doesn't get under the cappings nowhere near as well as the regular Mite Away. So you can use, or I'd put the 2 at 1. If you're going to use it up, put two at once for 7 days.
Okay, I don't really see any other questions, Ken. Does anybody have any last questions before we close down the session? Last chance.
Hopefully I'll see everybody out there. You have 2 free inspections, not counting the dead outs that I did. So put in your request, because you put them in earlier, you'll get to the month you request, you'll get us out earlier. So it's good to put them in now for the months that you want me. Good times, May, June, July, August. Those are, by September, it's getting late. So if there's something in your hives that you didn't catch, we'd be able to catch it and straighten you out. So put in for the inspections, you get 2 of them.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody, and we'll see you this summer.